Well, thanks for joining me again, folks. We are back for another wonderful episode of Advanced Squad Leader. This is your host, ID Jester. We're going to take a look at some of the rules in about 15 minutes. And as promised, we're going to continue looking at defensive fire. So last time we learned about the original defensive first fire. Pretty easy to understand that. But something I failed to mention and talk about, and I want to bring that to your attention now. If we look at this unit in M4, we have a full squad and we have a heavy machine gun. If during the course of play, we can tell it's the German player's movement phase, again here by our phase disc over here on the right hand side. So obviously it is the German player movement turn, and he'll be able to move his units around, and at that point the defender will be the Russian player, and he will get to defensive first fire at those units. One thing I forgot to mention or didn't really talk about is we can see here in M4 we have a full squad and we have a heavy machine gun. Remember, your full squads can keep their inherent firepower and fire one support weapon. While if we look at, say, K7 here, we have a half squad with a heavy machine gun. So in this case, the half squad can either keep its inherent firepower or use one support weapon. So in the course of play, let's just say, for example, the German player is moving this unit in J2 and he decides to move it here. At this point, the Russian player can determine, well, I want to fire just the full squad, or just the machine gun, or he can fire on both of them. And depending on what he decides to do, those units or that unit would get a first fire counter. So in this case, let's just assume that the Russian player decides he's just going to first fire with the squad. Well, in that case, just the squad would be first fire, have a first fire counter on it, and not the heavy machine gun. If he decided to shoot with the heavy machine gun and not the squad, then you would put the first fire counter just over the machine gun as opposed to putting it over the squad. And if you fired both, then obviously you're going to put the first fire counter on both of those. If down here in K7 they were going to defensive fire because it's a half squad, if the half squad decided to use its inherent firepower, or if he decided to shoot the heavy machine gun, no matter what he chooses, both of them are going to be marked. Both of them are going to be marked with the first fire counter. So depending on what he does with M4, some of these units or some of the support weapons, or maybe possibly both, might be marked with the first fire counter, as opposed to, say, K7 here, which is going to be a half squad. Either he uses the inherent firepower of the squad, or he uses the inherent firepower of the machine gun. Either way, both of those units in K7 will be marked with the first fire counter. So besides that, a pretty easy rule is the German player is moving his units around. You can decide what you're going to use to defensive first fire on those units. But as I mentioned at the end of the last episode, another very important rule comes into play after that, and that is Section A of the rulebook, subsection 8.3, subsequent first fire, or SFF. We've used that acronym a couple times so far, but that's what it stands for, subsequent first fire. So we're actually going to be spending some time looking at this rule and a couple of the other rules that actually pertain to some of the information that's in subsequent first fire. In fact, this rule is so important, I'm probably going to be spending just a couple episodes talking about and showing this rule and how it can affect play, because understanding defensive fire, the principles behind it, what you can do, what you should be looking for, is one of the most important aspects of Advanced Squad Leader, in my opinion anyways. And understanding and mastering the defensive fire and using your units to the fullest of their capabilities, obviously, is where you want to be able to do when you're playing Advanced Squad Leader. And if you use your units to the best of their capabilities, obviously it's going to give you the best chance to win this scenario. So let's look at Rule 8.3, subsequent first fire. And of course, what we're going to do is I'm going to just read the text and kind of highlight the important parts of it, and then I'm going to actually show you what all this text means, because reading the text really doesn't give you an explanation of exactly what the heck they're talking about. So a defending infantry unit already marked with the first fire counter. So this is going to be a unit that already has a first fire counter on it, whether it's a unit, a support weapon, or whatever, is going to be able to shoot again. And we're going to see that here. May defensive first fire again during the movement phase, but is this area fire. Now, if you remember from a few episodes ago, we talked about some of the bonuses and penalties associated with your different fire attacks: long range fire, area fire, point blank fire, adjacent fire, things like that. Remember when we talked about area fire is half your firepower. So what you do is you're going to be able to, units that are already marked with a first fire counter are going to get another defensive fire attack, but it's area fire, and you're going to flip over the first fire counter over to the final fire side. So if we take one of these counters here, let's just grab one of these. You can see that if I flip it over, let's see, there we go, boom. You'll notice on the opposite side, it's final fire. So you're going to have first fire, and you're going to have final fire. So that's what the two sides of this counter are. Let's go back to our rule here. Such fire can leave residual firepower. We have not talked about that. I'm probably not going to mention that until after we're done talking about subsequent first fire and final protective fire. Then we're going to start looking into residual firepower, so that'll be a few more episodes from now. So just be patient with that. If you're using a machine gun IFE, it's treated as sustained fire and penalized accordingly. That's one of the rules that we're actually going to be talking about down here, sustained fire. But let's go ahead and finish this this paragraph here first. Only small arms, machine guns, and IFEs can use subsequent first fire. So there is some restrictions on what is actually going to be able to do subsequent first fire. Small arms is basically your, what they call your infantry units use small arms. Subsequent first fire cannot be attempted against any target at a range greater than that to the closest armed known enemy unit, nor outside your normal range. And that obviously is in green because that is very, very important. This rule will come into play, and we will show you this through some examples here. But you can't shoot at anything outside the closest known enemy unit, nor outside your normal range. Like defensive first fire, subsequent first fire options are movement factor and movement point dependent. So if a unit spends 2 movement factors to move into a location, you can only spend 2 movement factors worth of defensive fire attacks. And that's kind of explained right here. Excuse me. The same unit weapon can never fire at a moving unit in the same location more times than the number of movement factors or movement points expended. Fractions rounded down, but a minimum of once per hex in the location during the movement phase. Again, another green sentence, which means, this is important. Whenever a unit uses subsequent first fire, it must, I wish I could bold that, but I can't. Yes, I can actually. It must use all MG and IFE in its possessions up to its normal operation capabilities. That means you can't use your squad as subsequent for fire. You would have to use your machine guns as well, because afterwards you're going to be marked with a final fire counter, and so you won't have any more chance to use your machine gun. Of course, there is another exception to this, which is your final protective fire. Hang on just a moment, please. Okay, sorry about that. So you will not be able to use your machine guns at all after that. So you want to use all of your possessions up during the subsequent first fire attack. And of course, like I was saying, before I had my coughing attack again. We were now I lost my train of thought. You're going to forfeit the use for the remainder of the player turn. Of course, there is an exception to this, which is going to be your final protective fire, which we're going to talk about actually whenever we get done with subsequent first fire, which I think is going to be probably an episode or two, because this is one of the most confusing parts just because of the way it's written in the rules. It's really not that hard when somebody explains it to you and shows you, and I guess, that's what I'm here for, is to kind of explain it and show you what they're actually talking about. So hopefully I can do a good job of that. A squad may not split its usable inherent firepower from that of its machine gun or IFE during subsequent first fire, unless it opts not to use any remaining support weapons or firepower at all. So what that means is when you're using subsequent first fire, your machine guns, your squads, everything is going to be focused on one attack, and you're going to have to use it all or you're going to lose it all. So whatever you don't use is gone. A multiple rate of fire weapon, again in green here, so another very important thing. A multiple rate of fire weapon cannot be fired more than once per subsequent first fire attack. So even if you have a multiple rate of fire weapon, subsequent first fire attacks, you cannot fire more than once. Rule 9.3, let's just go ahead and look at these and talk about these quickly before we start getting into showing you exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about sustained fire, section A of the rule book, subsection 9.3. Sustained fire, a machine gun that attacks using subsequent first fire or final protective fire. Again, FPF, we'll get to that one in a minute. Right now we're talking about SFF. Or during the defensive fire phase while marked with the first fire counter, is going to use sustained fire. So when you use sustained fire, you are going to be with a machine gun or support weapon as your subsequent first fire. You're going to be using sustained fire, and there's penalties associated with that. What are these penalties? Well, good thing you asked. The penalties is it's when you're using sustained fire, your break number, B number, remember B stands for break, X stands for remove, X number is remove, B number is break. Remember when you break a weapon, you're going to flip it over to the back side, flip it over to the other side of the counter, and it's going to have you a break number and a repair number on it. So B number or X number is going to be a remove number. So the counter is removed if it has an X number. So subsequently, a B number is lowered by 2. In addition to firepower being halved as area power, which we already talked about when we started looking at this rule up here when we talked about area fire. So not only is it going to be half firepower because you're using subsequent first firepower, but your break number is going to be lowered by 2, as well as being halved because of the area firepower. Sustained fire always forfeits any chance of additional shots during the current phase, which is basically what we just talked about just a minute ago with this last sentence here. A multiple rate of fire weapon cannot be fired more than once per subsequent first fire attack. And as a result of a final fire counter will be placed on the weapon regardless of its multiple rate of fire and the color die roll. So you're going to get one more shot. It's sustained fire, so your break number is going to lower by 2. And since it is considered a sustained fire, we also have to look at section A of the rule book. A11, I guess is what it is. A11, permanent breakdown. Whenever a weapon uses a form of fire which increases its breakdown frequency. Oh, wait a minute. We just looked at a rule like that. Holy cow, that's weird how I would put that on here. Anyways, whenever we use a form of fire which increases our breakdown frequency, which again, sustained fire is, and we decrease our break number or our B number or X number, and the examples are sustained fire, Inexperienced personnel. Remember we talked about those when we looked at our different kinds of units quite a few episodes ago. Ammunition shortage. Intensive fire or captured weapons or unqualified crews are some examples of permanent breakdown. When we have a permanent breakdown situation, such as sustained fire, and remember, sustained fire will be used because we're doing subsequent first fire. So even though we're talking about this one rule, subsequent first fire, there's a lot of other things that play into it, and that's what I wanted to also bring to your attention. It's going to transform the original break number to an X number during that use. And multiple causes of breakdown frequency are cumulative. So if you have inexperienced personnel and they're using sustained fire, that will obviously be cumulative. So I got a couple examples here to show you. Here we have a first fire. So we have a heavy machine gun, and it's first firing, and we have a light machine gun. And of course we're using Russian ones here. Each nationality is different, so you're just going to have to look at the different nationalities. During a first fire attack, the break number, B number, for the heavy machine gun, since it's not listed, is going to be 12, and there is no X number. There is no X number on that. During a first fire attack, we have a light machine gun here. It does have a B11 breakdown number, so its breakdown number obviously is going to be 11, and we again do not have an X number for this unit during first fire. When we're talking about subsequent first fire here, subsequent first fire, let's go ahead and highlight that. And let's do this. We'll make this one yellow so you can see the difference. There we go. During subsequent first fire, if we have a heavy machine gun, again, it doesn't have a breakdown number, so it's normally 12, but remember, because we're using sustained fire, our break number is going to be lowered by 2. So you can see here, normally it would be 12. During a subsequent first fire, it's going to have a break number of 11. 11. How about 10? Yes, 12 minus 2 is 10 every time I check. Same thing here with the light machine gun here. During a subsequent first fire, it again has a break number lowered by 2. 2 lower than 11 obviously is going to be a breakdown of 9. But because of this rule, permanent breakdown, A.11, A11, whenever you have a situation such as sustained fire, inexperienced personnel, remember your original B number, your original break number, is also going to be an X number during those rolls. So in this case, during subsequent first fire, we're going to have a breakdown of 10 on this unit because of the sustained fire, and we're also going to have an X number on this counter, X12, because of this permanent breakdown. Same thing here with the light machine gun. During subsequent first fire, it's going to have a breakdown number of 9 because of the sustained fire, and it's also, remember, because of the permanent breakdown, it's going to have an X number of 11, which is again going to be your original break number is going to be transformed into an X number. So if this unit here was to roll, say, at 11 during a subsequent first fire, it is removed from the game. It is not broken. It is removed from the game. It's X'd out. So that went a little bit longer than I even thought. So obviously we're going to be talking some more subsequent first fire. And be sure to look for that coming up in the next episode. Again, if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please leave them below, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Hopefully, we're going to take our time. We're going to go through this step by step so that we can kind of understand. Because like I said, it's not confusing. It's just trying to understand all the rules and how they play out. And next time, we're going to look specifically into subsequent first fire and look at, in our Vassal module, we're going to talk about how these rules play out. So this episode, we kind of just went over the rules, we talked about them, we highlighted some of the important wording of the rules, and next time we're going to show you what all that means. So thanks for stopping by and watching, and we'll see you next time.